it almost doesn't matter how amazing the thing is if everyone else is going to have the same thing. And so the question is just like, how does one differentiate? Like, that's the whole goal of marketing, like be better than other people, like sell more product.
Hi, I'm Greg Stewart, CEO of MMA Global, the international nonprofit trade association for CMOs who are focused on architecting a new future of marketing.
I'm Rex Briggs, an author, market researcher, measurement inventor, and entrepreneur.
So with us today is Alex Collmer, who's the founder and CEO at VidMob, a creative performance platform for marketing, obviously for the Decoding for AI for Marketing podcast. And let's get into it here. So Alex, just, let's jump right in. You actually, if I understand right here from having talked to you, and appreciate, you serve on the board of the MMA, appreciate you doing that. When it comes to making marketing content, I think you're suggesting there's a whole new paradigm emerging, and we just want to kind of hear your perspective as pertains to sort of AI. I think it's different than a lot of people think, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, Greg, Rex, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's great to be here. So yeah, listen, I think that this is a new paradigm for multiple reasons. So, the first is just sort of changing the nature of how people view where technology can be applied in marketing. And I think that, every one of the folks that, on the MMA board and that Rex has worked with forever, everyone expects to use technology to relentlessly optimize and improve their media, targeting, audience segmentation, et cetera. That's, sort of a given.
Yeah. At
the same time, essentially everyone will agree that creative is the most important driver of performance. You sort of see Google with this stat out there that 70% of results are driven by the creative, and I think Meta has a slightly smaller number, but still the majority. And yet, very little technology is utilized to actually understand creative or to optimize it. And so the first paradigm shift is us simply saying, hey, that's not right. It's time now to start building technology so that creative can become a lever to optimize alongside with media. And so that's the task that we've been working on now for the better part of 8 years. And then sort of in addition to that, now you have the advent of AI, which is on one hand making it easier to do that at scale, and then also creating a whole host of new challenges as just sort of the amount of content in the world moves from sort of a smaller amount to an infinite amount. And I think that's sort of where we are today, where we're sort of moving from sort of a world where content scarcity defined things to one where now essentially every marketer on the planet has a button, a metaphorical button they can push to infinitize all their content, and we're heading into a world of total content abundance.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you make the point about creative and how important that is. I have always found it bizarre how fixated marketers were on media mix optimization when the message is foundational. And I would say the audience also. But I mean, if you put a message that was just a blank white nothing, then you would have no lift. You would have no impact, no matter how much you spent on media, right? So why do you think AI is going to change how people approach the message part? And tell us a little bit about what you're doing with computer vision and
Sure.
Looking at features, because I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. So, I mean, Rex, your point's exactly right. Like I was actually talking with one of the leaders at a MMM provider today, and one of the things we were sort of, in a sense, kind of laughing about was that, like, the underlying assumption of this is that sort of all creative is the same. And anyone who's seen a great Apple or Nike or any ad and compares that to sort of like a basic cable ad knows that there's just that's a fundamentally flawed premise. So that clearly needs to change. To your second part of like how do we use AI to understand this? Like ultimately, what VidMob does is, at least in terms of understanding it, it's relatively simple. So we work with very large marketers. I think we work with something like 70% of the top 20 marketers. And they will use our technology to connect the different places where they are spending dollars. So, their TikTok accounts, their Amazon accounts, their Meta accounts, their Google, et cetera. And when it does that, our platform ingests every ad they've run, over the last few years, which is often going to be, tens or even hundreds of thousands of individual pieces of creative. And it'll go through every one of them individually and look kind of frame by frame and turn all of that creative into data. So you just take sort of like a 10-second long Instagram ad, and in every frame, there are things that are happening and there's things that are not. There may or may not be a logo present. The actress may be holding up the package of the lotion, or she may be rubbing it on her hand. And there's a certain pacing. There's the text is taking up a certain size. There's emotions are exhibited on her face, et cetera, to infinity. So we take all of that creative decision information, and then we pull all the behavior signals from the platform APIs. So all of the sort of media behaviors, the upper funnel engagement, view through, et cetera, all the way down to kind of lower funnel sales, et cetera. And then simply we cross those two data sets, the sort of creative attribute and the behavior. And we have a number of ML models we've built over the years that sort of go through that and surface insights. So then we can go back to a client and say, hey, if you're trying to drive 3-second view rate on TikTok in the Philippines for women in their 30s, it seems like you should do more of this and less of that. And then we give them means, either through their internal team, through agencies, or through our platform, to then essentially instantly respond to those insights with improved creative, and we can measure the impact.
Hey, Alex, give an example of maybe where you've seen that. Like that was, listen, you just picked a very specific, kind of, age limit country. Like, where have you seen that pop up that you, like, is there something standard in some regard against some group that you can suggest, just to illustrate the point?
Yeah, I mean, like the most basic standard, and we have scoring tools that will sort of score all of content, is just making sure that people are adhering to sort of like platform best practices. So, I'm not suggesting in any way that this is going to be the solve to everyone's marketing problems. Okay. But if you're marketing on Meta or YouTube, there just are certain things that are kind of no-brainers. Like, is your logo showing up in the first 3 seconds? Is there a strong call to action? And you'd be stunned by what percentage of creative doesn't follow these best practices. And so when you then show someone that say, hey, here's all of your media, and if you look at all the dollars you've spent and all these ads and all these impressions you've created, on average, only 3% of the audience is left by the time you show your logo and call to action. So you're basically doing just a solid for the category. You're boosting all your competitors the same you are for yourself. When people see that, they sort of very quickly understand the kind of most basic. But Greg, I can give you like a more specific and interesting example where we were working with sort of a travel company, a cruise line business. And our platform came back, and what we saw was that for people under 30 on Facebook, waterfalls and horses were really significant drivers of results. And so if we were just an AI, sort of like essentially like DCO tool, you'd have instantly now a bunch of ads turned around that were just like waterfall and horses, to infinity. Yep. But what happens is, like, now an analyst looks at that and is able to say, hey, the insight isn't actually that horses and waterfalls are needed. It's that people under 30 are going on cruises because they actually want to experience the world. It's about adventure, and it's about being off the ship. And so this client then was able to quickly rework their creative for people under 30 on Facebook around adventures, around experiences off the boat. And what we saw was instantly, essentially tripled their results. And so what it is it's this like intermixing of data that was previously unattainable, but then sort of a human interpretation that can take it from sort of like a machine insight to that strategic insight that it can actually move a business.
I think one of the things I think is really interesting is that content analysis has been around for a long time. I mean, on the internet, and if you go to the 1997 IAB ad effectiveness report, the first I think it was 13 banners that were measured. Scott McDonald, who's now the head of the Advertising Research Foundation, and I did the analysis of how much clutter there was, whether the logo was there, and so forth. So it's sort of amazing that you say that even after all these decades, there are still marketers getting that wrong. So how do you transform something? I mean, now you have so much more analysis, so many more versions, and you've brought computer vision to the game. How do you transform an organization with if they've known some of these best practices for a long time, but they haven't been listening? Are they listening now because you have AI or because you have data, or what changes that dynamic?
Probably because they pay Alex, so they better listen to him, I think, is what's happening here, right? I mean,
well, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's because they see results and they they hear about them elsewhere. So that's one. I think it's also because at some level they've recognized that they've kind of lost control. This is all sort of part of a progression where, they might have originally only had, one or a couple of agencies, and they might have only been, advertising on, one or a couple platforms. But today, when you're talking to these sort of large global enterprise marketers, they might have hundreds or even thousands of agencies, and they're communicating across dozens of platforms that are changing all the time and have literally hundreds of formats, and so they've totally lost control. They have no idea if the content, from like a D&I perspective is actually representative of the audience that they're trying to talk to. They have no idea if people are using this year's logo or last year's logo. If they're rolling out a new package type, they have no idea if it's still showing the old, detergent container or the new one. And so
you're saying it's a scale and the complexity that now requires us to shift modes from relying on humans and ourselves to relying on the machines and its capability. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think it's also, it's kind of like what we're seeing everywhere, where it's sort of moving from serial processing to parallel processing, right? Like I think of an A/B test as sort of like a serial process. I'm going to test A versus B and then C versus D. And, it's not terribly useful to know that A is better than B. Ultimately, what you really want to know is why. And so what we're sort of giving clients the ability to do is say, hey, if you actually look at all 10,000 of your ads together in aggregate and all of the audience behavioral response to that, you can actually see that many of these insights that you thought were true from your A/B testing were actually wrong. It wasn't that the cat was better than the dog. It was that the image in the back was nostalgic, or and so I do think it's just about sort of technology enabling us to do something more interesting.
How does VidMob actually isolate that kind of dynamic, Alex? Just make sure people are clear on that.
So it's about looking at everything. Looking at everything in aggregate is the key thing, Greg. Right. So if you're looking at one ad against another, it's very difficult to isolate. But if you're looking at 1,000 ads together, then you can actually isolate and figure out, all right, well, the presence of this element is a driver versus that one. And so a lot of what we're doing is actually working.
These 300 ads are doing better than these other 700 ads, for example, using your number.
Correct.
There. And we're able to identify that within 50 of those higher performers of the 300, we're seeing this kind of pattern. It's the pattern recognition that you're able to get to.
That's right. And I think what Rex was talking about earlier. Now the next exercise is going to be building the models to actually move from kind of elemental insights to sort of a next level up. And so this is sort of what we're working on doing now is sort of training things to actually essentially bundle and group things together into more meaningful groups that then allow for more strategic insights. And so I think that for us, the way we go about it is, VidMob is effectively all about building kind of a large-scale reinforcement learning model for creativity. Mm-hmm. And so what that means is that we're sort of capturing human decisioning on the actual creative side. So for every project we're involved in, we have not just the end file, but the actual Adobe edit files. So not just the Mona Lisa, but every brushstroke along the way and all the client communications back and forth, and we can look at that as part of our training. And then in that sort of insight generation, it's derived by analysts in our platform, whether they be VidMob employees or agency employees or brand employees, and then we can track all right, we had an insight that said, more horses. more adventures,
Yep.
and then tie it all the way through to lift or not lift, and then that flows back and actually informs it for the next time around. For the so it's intended to be sort of reinforced through both performance signals and integrated human decisioning.
Okay. So would you propose then that we never get away from humans in the mix? Or
listen, I think so. VidMob was founded specifically because I felt like creativity was going to be one of the last areas to fall. Okay. And the idea of building technology to sort of augment and support human labor felt like a worthy endeavor. Certainly now, things have changed a great deal with Gen AI, and it's starting to feel a lot like creativity is ground zero for change. But our view is that if your end goal is about emotional resonance and connecting in a unique way, I do think that sort of partnership of machine and sort of human for the last mile is going to continue to be important, and that's sort of the area that we find ourselves most interested.
Well, the data part's really interesting to me. You said a couple things. One was just about how you're getting the source files with Adobe so you can see the process and you can see the communications and the comments. That's really unique because a lot of people can go and connect up to the TikTok account, the Meta account, the Google account, and they can get that as well. We've seen a few other Gen AIs using that data source. And I've always felt like it's good data, it's interesting, it's a lot of data, but it's not really the right metrics because they force you into the metric that TikTok uses or that Meta uses, and they're not oftentimes the metric that the marketer really cares about. So one is I want to hear how you bridge or you're thinking about can you get to more powerful metrics, or is your secret sauce the fact that you've got that data, you've got a lot of experience using it, and then you also have the Adobe flow and process?
So it's a great question. So we started with those media metrics from the platforms. That was kind of the beginning, and I think the reason to start there was the APIs existed. It was sort of the logical place to start. But you're exactly right. Many of our clients, what they care about are impact on brand. They care about impact on sales. And so now what we're seeing ourselves do more and more is we're connecting into their brand lift studies, and those might be from platforms, they might be from other providers, and then we're coming back and showing the impact of creative and how creative ties to brand impact. And there we're actually working on new methodologies with something we're working on with L'Oreal in partnership with Meta, is bringing it down from the campaign level to sort of the asset and element level. And again, I think this is just something that kind of has to happen where, like, when we had less assets, 10, 20 years ago, it was okay to look at a campaign. But if you have 50,000 pieces of creative in market, like, you need to know what's driving brand lift and what's not. And then I think where things get really interesting, Rex, is tying through clean rooms to offline sales and sort of like the real bottom line. And so we're sort of in process now of hooking up those additional measurement pipes, and we're working with Amazon on a partnership through AMC to tie through to other data sources there. So it should get to like total business outcome.
Down to the creative
by the
asset
way-
and down to the creative feature, which that's the key. That's what a lot of other people don't have.
Hey, Rex, let me ask you a question that's based on something Alex just said. What do you think? He said that, hey, when you had a campaign, I think he said it was easy to get the creative right when you had, simpler number of assets. But Rex, neither you or I believe that, correct?
Well, I think in our book we found that even though that should be true, I think he was giving the benefit of the doubt to marketers, and that was very nice of you, Alex. That was really
very nice, Alex. But unfortunately, you're being too polite. Marketers are wrong. No, listen.
Well, an example of that was actually like with ESPN when they were doing World Series of Poker. They initially thought, because they were stick and ball guys, that they should just pile a big bunch of money on a table, and that's why people would want to watch the World Series of Poker. And what they learned was that that wasn't the message, that wasn't the motivation. The motivation was learning how to play better, watching the best players in the world compete, and they had to pivot their message to, back to your point, to then really show a whole different creative side of it. So I think that that's kind of the journey that we have found time and time again, where they don't know the motivations of the people, so they don't do the message right, and then nothing else really works as well as it could.
Yeah, and I think what they realized was that it was actually a math lesson, and that if you could show people the stats, that so they could actually learn how to play a hand, that was the unlock. It certainly unlocked it for me.
But what Rex is getting at is the work that, listen, when he founded multi-touch attribution back in the early 2000s, and he did that for himself, but in part for me when I was running the IB and focused on trying to get marketers to move to internet, which was very hard to do, and currently MMM didn't measure it. He actually really figured out in that research and the creation of MTA that there was basically three things. You had to get your motivation and it's basically what's your strategy for communicating to consumers. Then you had to figure out if you communicate that clearly, and then you had to get media mix right. And what we were finding again and again is that marketers were either wrong in strategy and motivations. They didn't find a consumer insight that mattered, which is just insane that marketers wouldn't get that right. And then they didn't communicate it clearly. So I think part of what I wonder, and this is kind of putting you in a spot for research you haven't seen, so I apologize for that. But I think you're really solving clearly the messaging contribution. Do you think though that VidMob's able to go back or AI can go back and figure out the strategy dynamic, the motivation issue of message development or marketing development? I don't know, that's a hard one, isn't it?
Well, I can tell you how we're sort of seeing it applied today. Because I think sometimes you sort of build these things and you're not exactly sure how it's going to be applied by the end user, but it's really kind of what we've seen is that VidMob is being utilized in kind of like 4 pretty clear use cases throughout the content supply chain.
Okay, great.
So the first, and I think this sort of is to kind of what you're talking about, is up front in sort of like creative planning, where people are actually thinking about campaigns.
Okay.
That's a group that is worried about not having access to data, right? They sort of feel like the media side has all the insights and they're not really generally shared.
Yeah, the
and
account
so
planners want consumer insights, absolutely. Yep.
So they're hungry for consumer insights, for creative insights. They want to know, should I shoot it this way or that? Do we want to there's just basically insights and learnings from the last campaign that show up in that process. So that's the first. Second is in the actual production. So, where someone's in the edit room, making changes to content. We're actually, we'll in about a month launch a plugin that will sit inside of the Adobe creative environments, inside Illustrator, Premiere, and After Effects. So as someone is creating, before they even render the asset, they'll be able to test it to make sure that it's following it's following the platform best practices. Check. That it's, if the brand has learned that actually for them, this other thing is important. You sort of have to open with an actress smiling and then show the relief of the the lotion. All of those things. Check. And then if you know what the audience is going to be, is it actually adhering to the best practices determined for that audience? So that you actually can't even render content until it's now compliant with all these sort of data-driven rules. And what that does then, it just up-levels all the content that's coming off of the sort of production lines, and that by the time media catches it, they're not in the world that they've always been in, where they're catching a bunch of things that aren't really fit for the plan, that aren't really designed for the channels they're going to be on. They just sort of eliminate all that. And then with the media teams, this is the third part, is they're taking the scores that are coming with this. So they know that if you have 2 assets and one has scores a 10 out of 100 for Pinterest and the other scores a 90 out of 100, well, you know what? Let's just make sure that other one is getting more dollars behind it than the other one, because it's we've shown that this ties to performance. And then lastly, during the flighting of a campaign, you actually can see when individual pieces of creative start to decay in performance. Learnings have already started to come in, and you can, if you want to, now optimize those and see the changes. And so it's sort of like those 4 integrated points throughout, and that gets you essentially an intelligent content supply chain.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, especially I love that last point too, if I could just say, which is basically you said figure out what sucks and don't do it anymore. I think sometimes that's half the battle of marketing. We don't get rid of enough stuff that doesn't work. Go ahead, Rex.
That might be half the battle in life as well as marketing. But
That's true. If I can mitigate my mistakes, I'll be doubly off better. Exactly, that's true. Thank you. Go ahead, Rex.
There's actually a lot of academic research that looks at distributions and say, instead of trying to move the middle, you lop off the lower half and you automatically do better. So you're not wrong mathematically. But I think that the interesting part in that last piece has been the issue of latency in clean rooms and trying to close the loop fast enough. Especially when you have things like, a lot of Greg's research at MMA Global around brand as performance say that the performance may be 2, 3, 4, it might be multiple years later for something. So first of all, talk to me a little bit about how you think about really low latency measurement and feedback. And if we're using something that's so fast that makes you adapt, are we sure it's the right thing and we're not grabbing the short-term performance and losing the long-term?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, and so we definitely, that's a big part of the reason why we focused on the media metrics in the beginning, because they're so fast, there's so much velocity there. It enables you to be agile in your creative response and then measure the results from that and sort of build the loops. But I think Rex, though, because we're able to go back multiple years in this, like I actually think you can do that analysis with a longer term point of view. You just need data across that, so you can go back and look from 2 years ago and see that this campaign and these creative elements and this and that led to these media metrics, and then here are the downstream brand behaviors and then the sort of further downstream sales behavior. So I would say that that's really not where we are in most cases. We're still sort of focused on the kind of more obvious, like kind of immediate. But I do think most of the data exists there to do that, and it might actually be a really interesting study that, frankly, we could do together, and we would love to do that with you guys.
It'd be fun to figure it out. I think that's the big unanswered question is, I think that was the issue in the early days of the internet, which was whether click-through was predictive of brand lift and sales, and it turned out not to be very predictive in a lot of cases. And so, I think that now the question for our AI age is if our high velocity metrics, the ones that we get today or in the next couple of days, are they predictive of really building the right relationship? And I worry that they're right for maybe existing customers, but maybe not for someone who doesn't know the brand yet. And we're going to have to think about how do we get audience and the ability to segment audiences and then apply the AI accordingly. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is frankly going to become even more relevant. I think a lot about the rise of Performance Max and Advantage Plus and some of these kind of black box end-to-end AI systems. And I mean, to exactly your point, like they're looking at a lot of like sort of fast twitch responses, and one of our clients is LVMH. We won an innovation award with them this summer and spent a bunch of time with Mathilde, and this idea that like they're focused above everything else on increasing desirability over the span of 100 years. And so if that's your goal, then optimizing for like clicks in the immediate, like,
oh my God,
it's hard to imagine that that's going to actually tie.
Yeah. Well, just to be clear, Rex's point was that clicks don't matter to sales in the near term. They sure shit don't matter in the long term. Hey, Alex, let me ask you a kind of funny question about this because, listen, Rex is the founder of MTA, as I mentioned. I think through Rex and then here at the MMA, have done probably more public MTA studies than almost anybody, right? Got to be true. Not even close to anybody else. Okay. And there's a very funny question that comes up. If you ask Vasilis, who did on my team, who did all that research, if you ask him, like, hey, what's the best marketing mix? And Vas will always answer the same, which it depends. Are you going after brand or are you going after performance? So I'm curious in VidMob, have you actually seen that the creative should be different? Have you figured out like what the difference would be in brand messaging versus performance-oriented messaging, what creative looks like?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, so, I mean, listen, I think it varies from brand to brand. So, you don't have a one common answer. But what we see is whether you're trying to drive, awareness or conversions or brand lift or, sales,
Yep.
it's, there's different tactics for each.
For the
and
same brand.
You got to know.
For the same brand,
absolutely.
it would be very different.
Well, take like a car, like where, I mean, if you put $5,000 off if you buy the car this week, that's going to drive a very different, right? I mean, you see, I mean, the classic one is the deal versus the brand. But yes, unpack that for a lot, because I think the listeners would be really interested in how computer vision has helped you gain the insights on the different features that lead to an immediate deal-oriented conversion versus maybe more of a brand building, desirability, I'll pay a premium conversion.
Yeah, and I think it is different when you're dealing with sort of feed-based content versus more sort of like longer form. I sort of tend to have this view that, if you think about over the span of like a 2-hour movie, I'm not sure that VidMob's technology would be terribly useful there. That's something that we process in a purely human way, and maybe there are certain components of that where you're trying to drive an emotional response, and so and that might be useful. But I certainly wouldn't want to put us up against James Cameron or something. But if you're scrolling through a feed and you're going to see something for a relatively small amount of time, I think we process that more like machines. And so it becomes very relevant how a machine processes it, because they're actually quite similar. And so that's a lot of what we're doing, is saying, all right, well, in these shorter exposure environments, in sort of a complex sort of low attention type of world, what is the best thing to do to drive KPI X versus KPI Y on platform Z versus platform N, because they are all quite different. Like the TikTok's behaviors, even though it looks the same as Snap, not the same.
Oh my God, Alex, I'm feeling so super vindicated by what you're saying here, because listen, there have been debates at the MMA board level, at CMO level, that have said repeatedly, they go, yeah, we put brand and performance together. And I'm like, I'll bet you that's wrong. And here's what's interesting about that point. This is how messed up the marketing business is. Oh boy, now you're going to get me going on this one. We just kind of make shit up because it sounds interesting. And one of the people, she's no longer on the board, but she was one of the most important, if not the most important person in the marketing industry, who was advocating that point of view. And I knew it was wrong. And I used to ask him, I says, are you blending brand and performance in the same ad because you don't know how to distinguish them and so you just mushed it together, or because you really know for a fact that that's true? Because I'll bet you it's not true. And people would sort of do it. It's very interesting. I love this. I mean, Rex and I know that from a media mix standpoint that they're not the same, but I don't know that I'd actually heard from a creative standpoint yet.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes it's helpful to just take these things to extreme. Like I think, like if you, let's say you're running, Nike's spot on on Colin Kaepernick. Sometimes it's worth giving up something to protect everything, or whatever the exact. Like, can you imagine if at the end of that it's like, buy now? Like the brand that goes away, right? You take think different and run that. So I think that when you take it to the extreme, it becomes pretty obvious, and when you take it to the less extreme, it's just the results are still there. They're just a little less obvious.
So Alex, I'm gonna make an offer here right on the podcast. The producer can decide I want to keep this in or not. Okay, but if you can arm us with the data. And Rex, obviously, I'm going to ask you hopefully develop a methodology here that the world can believe in. I would love to figure out this question. And in particular, we have to go do even an additional series of experiments and build a consortium of markers to work against it. I would love to do it. Because listen, you're telling me the data is the data, that there's facts out there on this. I'd love to kind of go figure out this question, because I think there's too many people. Again, I heard some of the biggest CMOs in the world talk about how that they're right on this, and I know they're wrong. And every time I challenge them, they don't have an answer. So I know doubly we're wrong.
Listen, I think this ties really well. So first of all, yes, we would love to do that. We definitely have the tools to do it, and it would be really fun to work with Rex and you on that. But I think it's also really important. I mean, because I've seen the work you've done, showing the downstream halo of brand investments on sales, down the road. And so, and then I listen. My previous company was a games business, and I suffered for a decade watching people call game CMOs sophisticated marketers just for throwing a bunch of garbage at the wall and letting the Facebook algorithm figure out whatever was best. And ultimately, as we got past ATT and that sort of world ended, what happened to a lot of those companies is they essentially went to zero the day they turned off, because there was no brand, no differentiation, and no lasting value. And so I do think that as we head into this world of kind of content infinity, and that AI is unquestionably bringing, I think brand is going to be more important than ever. And I think creativity is going to be more important than ever. And so I think if we can together help marketers understand this, and then help them understand how best to craft a brand campaign versus performance campaign, because those are still going to obviously be needed. We'd love that. That'd be really useful.
Rex,
Yeah,
Rex, this is funny that it's a tech guy telling us how the damn marketing business works, isn't it? So all due respect, Alex, by the way.
Seems
Maybe I'm a tech guy, or I'm sort of not really a tech guy and not really a marketing guy.
You're a tech guy with brand principles. How's that? I don't know.
Sounds good.
the bridge. Well, I do think that you have to get kicked in the teeth to understand some of these lessons, and it sounds like the games one, it was a kind of that wow, now I see that if we didn't build a brand, we don't have value once the algorithm isn't working for us. And it's an interesting point, because I think the tension that you're capturing in this moment where we're at with AI is that on the one hand, we can see that with creative optimization from AI, you can get, you can double the amount of conversions that you can get. I mean, we're seeing that in the Consortium for AI Personalization studies that we're doing, which is that if you give the AI 100 different versions to work with, different, some of it's just different layouts, like male voiceover versus female voiceover, different music. But sometimes it's also different images, and that can mean that you push into different brands. And so one thing that I've seen firsthand was when I was working on the Warner Brothers campaign for Creed, we did find that different versions appeal to people who loved Rocky. Like if you put the Rocky theme song in the background and Rocky Balboa, Sylvester Stallone, someone as old as Greg would like that. But someone young like me and you, we would like Michael B. Jordan.
Oh, we're bringing age into it now. Alex, can you filter that out? What do you think? Age makes a difference?
I was just envisioning how much of a struggle it would be to get up those stairs.
So, but it was interesting, because if you wanted to get a younger demo that was, especially one that was more, had a greater urban rather than Greg and I's suburban existence, then the different music soundtrack, that actually brought in different audiences. And we could see that as we were looking at the data. And back to your point about creative, there's as much as a 400% difference if you put the right creative in front of someone versus mismatching the creative. So I just think about your point. I'm like, it's interesting because you have this idea that I think it was McDonald's who developed, maybe it was Larry Light with the brand journalism, where you want different stories and different versions, but you have to have a core essence of the brand that still carries across. Yet the AI technology left unchecked would kind of explode that out, grab a little bit of incremental benefit, but might trade off a longer term brand effect. So I just think you're so interesting at the point. I think you described it as the Mr. Potato Head problem. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's. I feel like this might be another thing that betrays our age, but yeah, like I think in terms of Mr. Potato Heads, where to me DCO, at least in its kind of traditional construct, is essentially like a Mr. Potato Head randomizer. It's like, all right, you have this spreadsheet of copy, you have this spreadsheet of background images, you have this spreadsheet of things, and now put it in the Mr. Potato Head randomizer, and let's see what he looks like with glasses and funny arms and a mustache, and the algorithm will figure it out. And I just think like where we're going to is sort of two things. One is we have to be more purposeful in our creative, because it's like
it matters.
It matters, and the reality is, I think Nassim Taleb, sort of talked about like you sort of give a million monkeys a typewriter and one of them will write the Iliad, but I wouldn't give them a book guarantee for his next book. The thing that always struck me about that is that if in DCO, in DCO, you're publishing all the other 999,000 books. And like, there's just no way that's good for your brand. So like, I want to be more purposeful in this. And most importantly, if you're going to have a wide variety of content, either because you have, regional creatives that are adapting it all over the world, or because you're putting different, like, you need to have a system in place that you're learning from all those different places, so that that's then funneling back up and making you smarter at the front end. And so that, I think, it's time to move past Mr. Potato Head, and at least, like, if we're going to put arms in the sockets, let's at least know which ones are the best ones.
Well, and I think that that's the tension, which is that we do know that we can get incremental performance and benefit out of having more diversity of messages and images. So I think the challenge becomes, how do you get all that extra goodness from the AI personalization without compromising your brand core? And you have a really good point that I'd love to have you talk about a little bit. I'm going to talk about, and I think in our AI training coming up, which is the other thing is we need to make sure that as we're using these generative tools, we are enhancing some of our goals around diversity and inclusivity. And some of the AI doesn't do that if you don't have the right guiding hand. And so I know you also have the ability to look at what's been produced and to do some of the DEI checks. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually like one of our newest components of the platform. Like, we're sort of just rolling it out in beta now to a couple of clients, and we're sort of starting. It's an area that you want to do right, and so we're starting cautiously. And I think the idea first and foremost is just, hey, this isn't about sort of tying through to performance. This is about helping marketers just have visibility into, if they have certain goals in their creative, they want their creative to represent the audience that they're communicating, then let's just give them the ability first and foremost to measure how they're doing against that. Because a lot of times they don't, right? And they may actually be doing quite well in North America or some other region that's actually sort of top of mind for the CMO, but then they find out that, oh, actually, when I look at the data across LATAM or Eastern Europe or some other place that's sort of that's not top of mind, boy, we're really not living up to the principles of our brand. And so where we're starting is just giving people a way to assess all their creative and break it down and understand the sort of age, so they get a view of, like, sort of age inclusivity, get a view of sort of gender, declare gender inclusivity, and then get a view of, like, skin tone. So people can sort of say, all right, well, across the the 50,000 pieces of creative I have in market, how am I doing against these goals? And I think that's a good place to start. And we're seeing marketers really excited about there. Where it goes from there, we'll work with the marketing community and just try and support them, basically.
Hey, Alex, listen, I judge everybody based on whether or not I think I can learn something from you, by the way, and I really did that today. We can't thank you enough for that. If you were to sort of, and really, this is the ultimate hard question, and if you want to come back and change it later, we'll write something in there or whatever, but, like, if you were to, based on what you know, what you experienced, what you watched from, the top 100 brands, the thousands of ads that you're evaluating, the machine learning that's giving you back those insights, do you have a summary of what you would tell people? I think it's one of either two things. Like, how do you think they should be adopting AI into marketing, if you want to go out there? Or you might just want to say, in a more broader sense, like, what do you think people could do better to be better marketers today? Where would you point them?
Yeah, okay, so there's a couple things that we've seen. I think the first one is probably obvious, but I think it's just, this is not Web3. This is not a gimmick.
I mean, this is real. AI is real.
This is the real deal.
Yeah.
It's going to impact all of our lives.
No shit.
Hopefully positively. Yes, but this is definitely very real. So that's sort of point number one. And I think that the other thing that comes with that is, I don't think anyone appreciates how quickly it's going to advance. We're all sort of we tend to think of the future and how the pace that things will evolve in sort of the pace that they have evolved through we expect to see the same amount of change in the next 10 years that we saw in the previous 10 years, but that's not how exponential curves work. And we've all been trained on Moore's law, which is, things get twice as good every 18 months. But AI, if you listen to OpenAI, before they ceased to exist, or maybe now they're back to existing. But if you listen to OpenAI or Amazon, they both say that AI compute's doubling every 3.4 months. So we're talking about something that's advancing like 20 to 50 times faster than anything we've ever seen. And so if people are saying, hey, you know what, like I'm not that focused on AI, I'll pay attention when it becomes real.
Yeah, bullshit. Too late.
This thing's going to blow right past all of us. And so like the time is right now. So, and then the last thing I would say is it has to be done in conjunction with your whole kind of, workflow. Like this isn't something that just exists in like experimentation land. Like we're starting now to work with brands, agencies on both the creative and the media side. And that's really where we start to see impact, where, like as one collective team, we're sort of working together. We're bringing media and creative together in ways that they frankly haven't been in 30 years. And when you get into the actual like everyday way of working, then the magic happens. So that's what I would say.
I love it. Yeah, there's a word
great.
of warning. Rack, you agree?
Yeah, I like it. I agree. I love it. Hey, thank you so much for coming on the show, and we're looking forward to following up with you and figuring out ways we can work together.
Yeah, and Alec, by the way, thank you. You were the first tech supplier that we put on, our solutions company here. So thank you. We've really just had marketers, but I learned more from marketing today than I did from the marketers, unfortunately. And all just no disrespect to those who come before you. I think I just caused trouble again, didn't I, Rex?
You did.
No, I listen. This is a great conversation. I could have talked for hours with you guys, and I definitely we would love to participate in whatever kind of studies you guys are doing.
We're following up. We have research to do here. Yeah, we're going to go change the world with this. I got it. You're the best.
Awesome.